Hello, everyone. We apologize for, we've had a little bit of technical difficulties, but that's okay. We understand how technology works and how computers work. And we know that, although they make our lives easier, sometimes they can stress us out.
Yes.
So it's been one of those days, but, we feel like we've got to win. When we finally, everybody got on, I felt like Rocky in the movie, climbing up the top of those stairs. So on the screen, and well, not on the screen, well, on this webinar, this is our second political action webinar. Our topic, redistricting, how do we fight forward? And on the screen, we have Sadie Harper Scott, who is our political action chair. Is Sadie got to say something?
Hello, welcome. Hello and welcome to everybody. Good to see everybody. Thank you all so very much for coming today.
Hi, Sadie.
Hi, Lonnie.
How you be?
I'm wonderful. How are you?
I'm blessed. I'm hanging in, dear. I'm still here. I'm going to a lot of people, so I'm
wonderful.
glad none of them's mine.
Well, I guess these people who are having a reunion know each other. So that is Senator Lonnie Randolph, who's also joined us. And rounding out this group of four is Miss Ami Gandhi, who is with the Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. She has been a friend of the Indiana State Conference for a while now. And she is a native Hoosier who recently relocated back and is living in Bloomington. Fort Wayne was her original home. I'm doing so good because I'm not even reading a thing. I'm not reading a thing. And so she relocated here from Chicago. So Ami, you want to say anything, add anything to what?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for the opportunity to join you all.
Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is that there was we're part of the All In for Democracy Coalition that worked for the last year and a half in the redistricting effort. And so they had a recent webinar on Wednesday, I believe. So I asked that they send us that recording so that we could do a short replay of it. We're not playing the whole thing, but we will be playing about the first 30 minutes. And at the conclusion, we're going to come back. And at that time, we'll open it up for question and answers. Ami is featured on that webinar recording. And we're going to ask her, if there's anything she wants to, expound upon, or if there are questions out there about it, then we'll move forward from there. But at this time, I'm going to have to come off of the full screen and go to gallery view so that I can share my screen and we can get that. No, that's not working either. Okay, so that I can I'm not in share screen mode yet, am I?
No, ma'am. So at the bottom. No, ma'am, we don't see it.
How's that?
No, not yet. Did you click that green arrow at the bottom of your screen?
Well, I did that at first, and after it didn't, then I went to the more, and it brought up a lot of my documents that I'm looking at. So, I know what it said. I think I need to say hit share. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And I need to go to that one. Look at me.
Okay, so we can't hear it. Do me a favor, go ahead and stop sharing your screen.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm gonna have you hit share screen one more time.
Okay.
Okay, then once you have it selected, at the bottom of that window, there's going to be something that says a little box that you can check where it says share sound. Check that box for me, please.
Okay, I see what you're saying. I see where it is. She's giving preliminary remarks, so it's okay.
So I'm going to jump into it here pretty quickly.
We can hear it.
How do I enlarge it?
Well, thank you all again for joining us tonight. I titled this presentation, whoops, didn't mean to do that. The maps are done, so now what? Many of you have been with us working on fair redistricting reform for 6-7 years now. We formed the coalition back in 2015. So it feels a little weird that the 2021 process is over now. So I know it took me about a week or two to decompress, but we wanted certainly before the legislative session starts in 2022 to get our activists back together to talk a little bit about what we've been through and what is still ahead for us. So our webinar tonight is to reflect a little bit on the 2021 redistricting process, which we've just gone through together. We want to consider the impact of the congressional and state legislative districts that were just passed last month, signed into law by Governor Holcomb. We will discuss a little bit the Voting Rights Act, racial gerrymandering, what's involved when challenges to maps are filed under those circumstances. I've been getting quite a few questions from our members and others about the possibility of litigation. So we've provided an expert tonight to talk about how that works and the prospects here in Indiana for that kind of court challenge. And then last but not least, we want to look ahead to 2022. Because there's still a lot more redistricting to be done here in Indiana. Local government has to pass maps. So counties, city councils, they will be drawing new districts. And those are opportunities to help inform our local elected officials about best practices in terms of redistricting reform. And then we built a lot of momentum to come back in 2022 and work on redistricting reform in the state legislature. We've got Senator Fatty Cadora, one of the leaders in those efforts, with us tonight. So he'll provide you information on what's ahead at the state level in terms of redistricting reform. As I've hinted to, our presenters tonight include Ami Gandhi with the Chicago Lawyers Committee on Civil Rights, Sonia Learcamp, who chaired our Model Redistricting Commission, the Indiana Citizens Redistricting Commission, Senator Cadora, who's new to the Indiana State Senate, but has quickly become one of our fiercest advocates for redistricting reform. So that's who's going to be talking tonight, but we also want to take your questions and comments. So we've reserved the time of 8:15 to 8:30 for your questions. You can ask those using either the question and answer function at the bottom of your Zoom tab, or you can use the raise your hand function. You'll be recognized. You can unmute yourself and ask your question verbally. We also have several other members of the Citizens Redistricting Commission who've joined us this evening, so we would certainly invite them to, at the end of the presentations, provide any comments that they may be moved to offer. So let's talk a little bit about what happened in 2021 with redistricting. Certainly for those of us who've been through it before, it wasn't terribly surprising. We were disappointed that our efforts didn't have a bigger impact, but we're certainly not defeated because we had some success. Certainly the Indiana Citizens Redistricting Commission and the parallel process that we set up through the commission was a great example of what's possible if we reform redistricting in the Hoosier state. And I think importantly, our parallel process demystified the process for a whole lot of legislators who really didn't understand and had some big misconceptions about what life would be like with a citizens commission offering their contributions to this process. So I think it was very informative, very useful, and really achieved exactly what we hoped it would. Through the ICRC and various other efforts that our coalition did, we got a lot of good media coverage all around the state. I really have to commend Community Newspaper Holdings. Their State House reporter, Whitney Downard, covered this issue religiously. And that meant that these stories got out to small towns across Indiana, rural areas where it's really important that the redistricting reform message be heard. So we generated tons of media coverage, and many of you wrote op-eds or letters to the editor that were published at the local level. That was incredibly helpful. So we really thank you for all your work there. You know, we held webinar after webinar, public hearing, virtual hearing after virtual hearing, and all of that work paid off. Because in the public hearings, both at the State House and the field hearings that the legislature held around the state, we heard our talking points repeated over and over. So you guys really did a great job of staying on message. And, you know, we heard over and over again, the legislature shouldn't be doing this. We need this job to be done by a citizens commission. So it was really gratifying to see that work pay off after, you know, so many months of repeating ourselves over and over again. It was great. If you attended any of the field hearings around the state, you know that it was standing room only. And I can tell you that legislators have never faced those kinds of crowds before when the topic was redistricting. So we really did, again, some great work there. And, you know, we can look at the micro level and see that the public testimony that was generated from our hearings that we included in the report to the legislature that the Citizens Commission delivered, the legislature acted on that. Monroe County, so many people divided about that county being chopped up into 5 different House districts. Well, it's now down to 4. Greencastle, we heard testimony about that small town being divided down the middle into 2 different state Senate districts. That was corrected. Cambridge Square Apartments in Fort Wayne, where we heard testimony about how illogically it had been divided previously into 4 different legislative districts. It's now down to 1. So certainly our process helped elevate the voices of citizens like never before. So that's absolutely something that we should be proud of. Now let's talk a little bit about these maps. Again, it's not surprising that we ended up that maps drawn by a supermajority are going to benefit that supermajority. Now, certainly the demographic and population changes that have occurred in Indiana created some interesting circumstances. You know, there's a new legislative district in the Indianapolis area, an open seat down in Bloomington. So sometimes, you know, you're stuck. There's only so many ways you can draw the lines. And so we're going to see some interesting races next year because of the new maps. But overall, it's kind of same old, same old. Certainly, we will continue to see 9 congressional districts that don't generate much interest because they're safe. We can pretty much guarantee that the incumbents at the congressional level will continue to get reelected. At the state legislative level, again, very little competition. I think interestingly, we're seeing many longtime legislators retiring because of the new districts. And of course, many of these retirements are really forced retirements because 2 incumbents ended up in the same district. And there are many Republicans who are not happy about these new districts, certainly down in Clark and Floyd counties. The county Republican Party joined with the county Democrat Party to complain about the reshifting of districts around there. So that really now Clark and Floyd County don't have a real voice in the Senate districts down there. You're going to see Representative Jeff Ellington, a Republican, whose district was made much more competitive. I mentioned earlier there was some consolidation of the districts in Monroe County, and Ellington was the real loser in that. He now finds himself in a district that is pretty much 50-50. And apparently he didn't like that so much that he has actually moved into another district with Representative Borders, also known as Representative Elvis. And so you are going to see 2 incumbents square off in the Republican primary next year, again, because of redistricting. And then the leadership, certainly in the House of Representatives, targeted some of its problem children. Kurt Nicely up in Northern Indiana has found himself in a district with another incumbent. Representative Jacobs down in Johnson County wasn't at all happy with his district. In fact, was one of the 3 Republicans in the House to vote against the maps. So I think that all of this has created some rifts in the Republican Party. So we need to take advantage of that and take some of the discontent among Republicans about these new districts and turn that into discontent with the process and get those people engaged in our efforts for redistricting reform. So we've got to just continue to keep building momentum. I know it's been a long haul, but we've always said this is a marathon and not a sprint. So 2022 presents a lot of opportunities. Local governments will be redistricting next year. So that's cities and counties. In a lot of communities, this isn't terribly controversial, but certainly in Marion County, it has been. Our maps for city county council have gone to the Indiana Supreme Court in both 2001 and 2011. So we will be working to pressure cities and counties to follow the example of Bloomington and Monroe County, which created citizens commissions that will be charged with drawing their new districts. And that was a result of local activism by our folks in that community. So we will be prioritizing the 25 cities that passed resolutions. You may recall that many of you worked very hard at the local level to get your city councils or county commissions to pass resolutions calling on the legislature to pass redistricting reform. So certainly those public bodies should be encouraged to put their money where their mouth was and enact those reforms for local redistricting. We may put together in Marion County a citizens commission similar to the one we did at the state level hold public hearings. I don't know yet whether we'd be able to procure the public mapping software, but that's certainly a possibility here in Marion County. And then, of course, it's just a couple of months. The General Assembly will be back at work on January 4th. So we've got to come back strong for legislative reform, because we've got these very fresh memories in the public and in the legislature's mind about how ugly this process is and how it really creates winners and losers in a very opaque way. So we've got a new approach. I will let Senator Kadora talk to you about that, but we hope we'll be able to develop some new leadership within the General Assembly to give he and his allies some support, because this is obviously a very heavy lift. But it's up to us, folks. You know, hopefully the United States Congress will pass the Freedom to Vote Act, which would contain significant redistricting reform for congressional districts anyway. But we can't wait for any knight in shining armor to come and reform redistricting for us. It really is up to us. So our next opportunity to make a difference is November 16th. That is Legislative Organization Day. That's the time when legislators will gather in Indianapolis and start getting ready for the 2022 session. So our coalition will definitely have a presence. I haven't decided exactly what it will entail. We're meeting tomorrow to hash out all those details, but I hope you will be able to be with us either in person or virtually, because we've done a lot of work, but our work isn't done yet. So thanks again. And I am going to turn the program over to Ami Gandhi.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you for your leadership and for the opportunity to share some of my thoughts this evening about racial gerrymandering and the Voting Rights Act. I wanted to provide a little bit of introduction. I work for an organization called Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, but the name of the organization is a bit misleading because I lead our work for voting rights, for protecting voting rights in both Illinois and Indiana. And I myself am an Indiana resident. I live in Monroe County. I was born and raised in Fort Wayne, and really glad for the privilege to get to move back to Indiana earlier this year and work more squarely on Indiana issues now that I'm back in my home state. To begin with, I wanted to mention that you'll hear me in talking about federal voting rights protections, you'll hear me use the term minorities from time to time. It's an outdated term. I wouldn't normally use that. It doesn't even really make sense in some of our neighborhoods and communities where people of color are not necessarily the numerical minority anymore. But I use that term because it's a word used in the language of the law and is part of the legal infrastructure that relates to civil rights and voting rights. And moving on to the next slide, you'll hear me speaking about the Voting Rights Act of 1965, a really landmark protection that passed in our country's history to protect the voting rights of all American citizens, regardless of race, ensuring that our representatives reflect the racial and ethnic diversity in the United States, and ensuring the fairness and non-discrimination of voting processes. Some of these standards are more aspirational than the reality, unfortunately, but there's no doubt that the Voting Rights Act has made a significant impact, both then and now. And for example, back when it was passed, the thought was to try to bring about a change to overcome legal barriers at the state and local levels that prevented Black citizens and other community members of color from exercising their right to vote, seat tests, poll taxes, or discriminatory application of voter registration rules. When it comes to redistricting in particular, Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act is especially important because it protects the ability of communities of color to elect the candidates of their choice. And it says that district lines at any level of government cannot be drawn in such a manner to improperly dilute minorities' voting power. And it protects community members from discrimination based on race, color, or membership in a language minority group. Now, in this particular presentation, I'm going to keep it brief and I won't be talking about what the cracking and packing looked like in the Indiana state lines passed this year in particular. Just know that we are available as Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, and I am available, and we do get brought on frequently by community organizations who especially work with people of color to take a look at some specific lines, some specific local dynamics and demographic information so that we can weigh in further about our legal impression about the fairness of those lines. And we are a nonpartisan organization, and we have been of service to a lot of community groups focusing on people of color. A few key terms to keep in mind when it comes to gerrymandering and legal protections. I know, no doubt, have learned a lot about the threats of partisan gerrymandering from experts like Julia and other activists in our state. And you've probably talked about in previous programs how there has really been a weakening of the legal mechanisms to challenge partisan gerrymandering or to challenge politicians' ability to game the redistricting system for their own benefit or for their own incumbency protection or partisan protection. It's also important to keep in mind the perpetuation of racial gerrymandering in our society and in our very state. And what I mean by that is what happens when districts are drawn in a way to dilute the voting power of racial minorities or of communities of color. When you hear about a term called racially polarized voting, I'm referring to one of the necessary elements that has to be proven in order to have a viable case in a court under the Voting Rights Act when it comes to race and redistricting. So to successfully prove racial gerrymandering in court, one has to show the existence of racially polarized voting, usually through statistical analysis and expert analysis. There are a couple different general situations when courts would step in. When the gerrymandering was so egregious that a court would step in to force a state legislature or another line drawing body to change the lines that they drew and that they finalized. And just at a very zoomed out level, I'm oversimplifying, but a couple situations when courts would step in and have the power to step in would be when a redistricting plan intentionally discriminates on the basis of race, or when the redistricting plan that was passed has the effect of discriminating on the basis of race. The intentional discrimination cases, they're not a total vestige of the past. They do still get brought from time to time, but it's important to keep in mind that having that direct evidence of racial intent is going to be rare. The line drawers or the legislators who have the power to draw the district lines might not have been speaking in as explicit of terms about the reasoning for what they were doing or have that documented for a community organization to be able to bring a solid claim of intentional discrimination. And really, this goes back to how we experience racism in our society today, including in Indiana. It's not always going to be an overt act, even if it has a systemic effect of impacting Black community members and other voters of color. It could take a lot to be able to show a case of intentional discrimination on the basis of race when it comes to redistricting. But there are instances based on the sorts of racist events that might happen in a geographic area or other local context and historical background that may establish such a case. What's more common to see in the courts, going to the next slide, what's more common to see in the courts after redistricting plans are passed is challenges based on the effect of discriminating on the basis of race. And that would be a claim typically under Section 2 of the Federal Voting Rights Act. And I want to share a little bit about what it looks like to lay out all of the required legal factors in the context of a viable complaint under Section 2 of the Federal Voting Rights Act. So the first thing that lawyers would do when trying to put together such a case at the request of a client would be to look at whether what's called the jingles factors are met. And these are factors set forth in previous case law by the United States Supreme Court. And there are 3 jingles factors. The first one that has to be shown is that the minority group in question is sufficiently large to constitute the majority of a district. So in other words, could a district have been drawn that had majority people in that specific racial minority group? That's the first thing that has to be shown. If not, if it's a smaller community, for example, I am from the Asian American community, I'm Indian American. In many parts of the country, my racial group is small enough such that we couldn't necessarily bring a viable claim showing that we could constitute the majority of a political district. It depends on the state, it depends on the specific region. In addition to having to show that the minority group in question is sufficiently large to constitute the majority of a district, the next factor that has to be shown is that the voters in that racial minority group tend to vote together for the same candidates, that they're politically cohesive, that they tend to vote together. And then the third jingles factor is something that consumes the attention of a lot of voting rights attorneys like myself. Not the easiest thing to show. And the third factor requires that white voters tend to vote against the minority group's preferences, that white voters in that geographic area vote in a way to defeat the candidate of choice of, Black voters, for example. So again, this racially polarized voting requirement shows up and has to be shown through statistical analysis and often expert analysis. Only if those basic factors are met does a court start also evaluating what's called the totality of the circumstances, looking at the history of discrimination in that area, trying to get a local flavor of the dynamics of what are some of the lived experiences of people of color and of people who have faced discrimination themselves in their lives. Racial appeals, or in other words, racist rhetoric in elections in the challenged jurisdiction is another matter that the court would look at under the totality of the circumstances. And responsiveness or lack of responsiveness of elected officials to the needs and interests of that community of color. And so I listed a whole bunch of things for you. And what I'm trying to say is that it's not an easy process to challenge redistricting when it comes to race and redistricting. There are a lot of redistricting plans that are harmful to communities of color, that disenfranchise our communities, and that are unfair, but that might not rise to the level of being illegal. And last but not least, I wanted to give you a very recent update. And we can go to the last slide where you can see my contact information as well. I wanted to share with you that our organization recently, just in the past couple of weeks, filed suit against the Illinois legislature under a Section 2 Voting Rights Act claim. And our clients in that matter are the Illinois State Conference of the NAACP, the East St. Louis branch of the NAACP, and a multiracial organization called United Congress of Community and Religious Organizations that works towards Black and Brown community empowerment in Illinois. And our case sets forth our concern that the voting rights of Black community members were diluted in the East St. Louis area, which is the area on the outskirts of St. Louis, but on the Illinois side of the state border. And we allege that this happened through the state redistricting process that occurred earlier this year. And I want to share with you that we filed this case after months of a client-driven process where community members who are directly affected by this vote dilution, by this disenfranchisement, really did a lot of investigation within their communities, a lot of soul searching about, is litigation the right option for us? And when they concluded that it was, when they concluded that they had a solid case, that they wanted to move forward in this way against, their elected officials who drew the lines, then we decided to go for it. It's been taking a significant amount of resources, probably as you can imagine. Our legal team is our organization, which is Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, and we're co-counseling with the National Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights and a large law firm who is providing pro bono services. So it's a significant expenditure of time and resources, and it's a big time crunch. These redistricting cases move extremely rapidly because any state who gets challenged under a case like this is going to say, look, we need to have our lines completely finalized and any challenges resolved before the time of the next primary election or the next election, because candidates and voters need to know for sure what are the district lines going to be. And so I'm not trying to give a terrible sales pitch for redistricting litigation, but just it's really important for community members who are most directly affected by disenfranchisement to go into it with their eyes open and be fully informed about the repercussions and the implications of filing such a suit. And thank you so much for the chance to share my thoughts with you this evening.
Thanks, Ami, for that presentation and for all the
Trying to stop that video now. So I'm not sure what I need to do for. Okay. Hopefully we can come back. No. Okay. Are we all back?
I'm back.
Are we all back?
Yes, I'm back, Sadie.
Yes.
Okay, good. Yeah, that's great. Okay, I'm trying to get back to, because I'm still looking at that other screen. I'm trying to get out of that. Are you still seeing my screen?
No, it looks good. I
Doesn't
see
good?
the other speakers.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, let's see here. I don't know what I'm doing. Okay. So, Ami, did you want to add anything to your presentation just then?
No, it's not every day I'm on a webinar, watching a webinar myself. So I look forward to digging into conversation with you all and learning from you.
Okay. So, you heard, well, as we know, they gave us the status as we are in Indiana right now, that we have already drawn our maps and the chips are falling where they may. And the question is, how do we fight forward? So there are two options that kind of are on the table. One of them is to, one of the options is to consider litigation. And I laid it out kind of how litigation occurs, after, considerable discussion, research, analysis. And then the other option is to work and continue the effort of reforming the state legislature through bills, which is certainly Senator Randolph's area. And that, of course, we know if we go that road, it's going to take about another, 8-10 years, because, we won't have another opportunity to actually see if we can get a bill passed until, until that time comes 10 years from now. So I guess if we're looking for any type of immediate relief, then the only avenue is through litigation. So I guess those are the things that our communities need to look at when they have to deal with the repercussions or the fallout from the map. I look specifically at Fort Wayne. And Fort Wayne was divided into 4 districts. The city of Fort Wayne was divided into 4 districts. So, you can imagine, what they're feeling and how it's affecting them. Senator Randolph, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Barb.
Okay, so has there been any discussion with some of your colleagues as to how they think Indiana needs to move forward, given the maps that we have adopted, that the state has adopted?
Barb, I've got my personal thoughts concerning everything, and I'm at the point now where we've got to take action. You see 2 options: litigation, continued legislative reform. Screw legislative reform. You've got a majority Republicans, and they're not going to move. Now you got another decade to wait for that. So that's not going to happen. I think we should be focusing on litigation. I say sue them. Start suing. It's like the squeaky wheel. If it squeaks loud enough, it should get some grease. We don't squeak at all. It's time for us to start squeaking, okay? And I was particularly pleased that our men would talk about the litigation in Illinois. That's what has to happen in Indiana. They keep knocking us side the head, and we've been keeping it and accepting that for so long. Now all of a sudden, one day they walk in and they knock us out the head, and they look at us like we're crazy. Aren't you used to us knocking us out the head? So why are you acting out? We have to start acting up a little bit more often, okay? And litigation is the answer. Now, the response I got in our caucus when we had a caucus about this issue was that it's difficult to file suit and the cost factor. And I said, everything that you want to do when you're behind is difficult, but you got to start somewhere. My motto when I was campaigning was a long journey starts with the first step. Well, we got to take that first step. And I say litigation. When they see that we're not going to take it lying down, we're going to take some action, then we might get some response in a positive nature. Okay, because they're going to react to litigation. If we don't do any litigation, they're not going to react to anything. They continue to do what they've been doing all along, kicking us in the butt. And I'm sorry for speaking so candid, but that's what it is. So litigation, we're going to have to start thinking that way and actually doing it. And I'm sick of talking about it. I said in the caucus, I'll file the lawsuit. We'll worry about the money later on. Okay. But I mean, I get upset about this stuff because it pisses me off, excuse my language, because I'm the thing is conduct is worth 1,000 words. You can say and tell me what you think and what you believe 1,000 times. But if you don't do anything toward that belief, then it tells me that you only sugarcoat it. You only snowblow to me. I don't want to hear that crap. You tell me one thing, show me by doing it. Show me by conduct. And it's time for us to start showing instead of talking about it, okay? And that's my position. Let's sue them.
Sadie, you unmuted. Go ahead.
Senator Randolph, you said you can file it. What do you need from the people on this conference today to get that started?
All I need is for the people to say, we're behind you, Mr. Randolph. These are the people that's going to support you. Here's the money. Here's our business. Here's the legal team. File a damn lawsuit.
Okay, what does the money look like? When you say the money, the cost?
I don't know. I don't know what the cost is, but it only costs like a couple $100 just to file a lawsuit.
I got $200. Let's do it.
Yep, that's a start.
I'll head where are y'all? Bring you my check. We started. I mean, this is where the conversation start action. Let's
Yeah.
get it done.
Yeah.
So you'll be the one that will spearhead the filing of it?
I mean,
I'd be happy to file it. So
I mean, and I are kind of smiling, and I'm surprised that Senator Randolph isn't smiling too, because he is an attorney as well, and he knows that it takes a little bit more than getting the filing fee together. I think he knows that. So
Yeah.
I guess the thing is that I'm asking of you, Ami, is what are some of the factors that go into the decision-making process to evaluate whether or not litigation is feasible? You know, you can want to do it, but sometimes it's just not feasible. So what are those factors?
One piece that's really important that I've worked on redistricting advocacy for over 10 years, but I am starting to get more experience with redistricting litigation in particular. And one of the things I've learned from people who are seasoned in it and have been working in the courts trying to make change for decades is how important that element of racially polarized voting is to show in a case like this. And to break it down a little bit, what it means is being able to show that in that specific geographic area, so whether it's Fort Wayne or Indianapolis area or Lake County area, whatever people are looking at for the possibility of filing suit alleging that votes have been diluted in that area, to show that there are specific elections that have happened where white voters voted in a way to defeat the candidate of choice for example, Black voters. And being able to name those specific elections, it might mean that a Black community member ran and lost. It might mean that they won by a small margin and lost in the white area precincts. It might mean something a little bit more complicated of a story than that, because all of our communities are nuanced and complicated. But it's through statistical analysis of hearing some of those examples, which only the communities who live, only the people who live in those areas would know best about what comes to mind for them of what are some elections that happened. They might be really local level elections, or they might have been something more of a statewide election, but they saw a certain pattern happening among who people were voting for in their area. And so those are some of the ideas that community members directly affected by the disenfranchisement would need to raise, bring to the attention of attorneys, statisticians, so that folks like us could look it over and say, is there a viable chance of showing this required element of racially polarized voting? And there are a lot of organized efforts out there to claim that we're past racism, to claim that we're past racially polarized voting. I don't buy all of that. I think it's worth looking beneath the surface and really seeing what we can uncover as community members together to raise up those examples. If our instinct tells us we're not totally past racism, if our instinct tells us there are elections where the way things played out, white voters did vote in a way to defeat the candidate of choice of Black voters, then we have to take a closer look at that. And then when there is some more traction around that sort of element, that sort of story, that's when some doors start to open in terms of the legal planning. That's when pro bono law firms like the organization where I work, Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, or National Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, as well as the major private law firms could be interested in coming on as pro bono counsel. And so that's when things start to change, is when community members themselves raise these issues through the NAACP or through other esteemed nonpartisan civic organizations.
I mean, can we talk for a second in terms of what's the name of the Chicago group that you're with?
Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil
Lawyers Committee on Civil, Lawyers Committee on Civil Rights. Do their jurisdiction or their defined obligation that they've committed to, does that include any state like Indiana?
Yes, Illinois and Indiana.
Okay, so Indiana as well. Yeah, so is it possible where we can get together with your group there and consider litigation in Indiana? And I say that for a couple of reasons, because you had mentioned something in terms of, I guess, disparity effect in terms of what it have on minorities. But also, I would think that that theory could apply to the disparity and effect it have on Democrats. For example, in Lafayette, Tippecanoe County, you've got a large congregation of African Americans and Democrats within the city. The redrawing of the new maps divides West and East Lafayette in two and adds some rural districts within those cities, and it dilutes the Democratic vote that's particularly in West Lafayette, okay? And also that has the dual effect of eliminating the African-American vote in that area. When you go to Evansville, down in, what is that county down there in Evansville?
Vanderbilt.
Vanderbilt County. You got a large congregation of African-Americans within the city. Now, all of a sudden, the new maps have divvied that city part up to the point where it added in some rural districts, and the rural districts are Republican districts, which dilutes the Democratic vote that's coming out of Evansville. When you go to Allen County, when you're Fort Wayne, in Fort Wayne, you've got a county that's a Republican county, but the city is Democrat. You've got a Democratic mayor there in Fort Wayne, but beyond that, you've got Republicans. Those 4 districts that draws a map through that city, it dilutes the Black votes, which is majority of that's within that area, as well as the Democratic votes, which means, and it added on some rural districts in those areas, and the rural districts in Allen County are mostly Republicans, but it's diluting the Democratic vote and it's diluting the Black vote there, okay? And in Indianapolis, what they've been doing, they've been trying like heck to scratch Indianapolis because they've added on some additional rural areas that touching on the outskirts of Indianapolis. So what it does is it increases the chances of Republicans maintaining their seat without having any competition at all, okay? They've got a new district that they drew there in Indianapolis, and I don't know whether or not Democrats have an opportunity to capture a position for the Democratic Party in that new district or not. I don't know. They've been trying to get in Lake County for years now. They've got a couple of South counties in Lakes, a couple of districts in the state representative district in South County, but they've been trying to get in the North County. So they've created a new district in North County now in the western part of the county where it used to be Frank Mervan as a Democrat. He was in the first district, and his district included Hammond. It included part of Maryville. It also included Griffith, Highland area, right? So now they've eliminated that, created a new district, put him in my district, which is District 2. And in District 1 now, they've moved further south. It's Hammond is out of it now. So it's in Griffith, it's Highland, it's St. John, it's Dyer. This is all supposedly going further south in terms of Republican district. And it's going to be open. Would increase the opportunity for Republican to win. They did that purposely. Whereas previously it's been consistently a Democrat district. Now there's a chance for a Republican to win it, okay? And I'm talking too long now, but my point is there a possibility where we can get the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights to come in Indiana and look at some specific areas? And I'm suggesting that we look specifically at Allen County, we look specifically at the Vanderbilt County, and we look specifically at Lafayette, because I think the facts are there to prove a case concerning those particular areas. And I'd like to be able to start something. So, and I'd be happy, man, to work with you in terms of the litigation for that purpose. Whatever role you like me to play, I would be happy to play it, okay?
So first of all, I want to say thank you for educating me, because it's really helpful to hear this rich information about different communities, some that I have familiarity with and family in some of these places, some that I'm new to learning about, particularly with regard to the experiences of the Black community. I want to reiterate that under the legal protections, just generally speaking, there is more of a chance for legal claims based on race and redistricting as opposed to party and redistricting. As frustrating as that is to some folks, I think particularly in Indiana, we see it's intertwined. It's not, you can't totally keep it separate in terms of people's life experience and voters' experience, but under the law, there is more of a path forward under the current law when we're talking about potential dilution of votes based on the racial identity as compared to the party identity of voters. And then the last thing I want to say is that as a nonpartisan legal organization, we're first and foremost led by our clients. I know this is not news to any of my esteemed fellow speakers in this panel, but we go by what our clients tell us. And typically our clients are nonpartisan civic organizations who focus on people of color. So if a certain path is what they want to take, then we look into gaining resources so that we could make it happen. And we're obviously a pro bono law firm. But it is really up to, in our eyes, the nonpartisan civic organizations such as NAACP and others to make these kind of calls. And then that drives us as far as what legal work we can provide, but definitely happy to stay connected on this issue because it sounds like it's of utmost importance to Black voters and other voters of color in Indiana.
Yeah, and I'd like to stay in touch with you directly and concerning I really want to try to get something done in Indiana because we haven't been done nothing, not a damn thing. And I want to do something, okay? And I think in Indiana, we do approach minority, especially Blacks. That could be the main one, but there's nothing wrong with throwing in a second count, what I call a shotgun approach. That as well as the Democratic Party too. You're diluting the Black vote as well as you're diluting the Democratic vote. Black could be number one, Democrat could be number two. But anyway, that's a shotgun approach. Shoot them both. What happens? I mean, and see which one catches. Chances are the minority vote will catch first, but who knows? The Democrat vote might catch 12. The more people, the more allegations you have, I think the better chance you have in terms of getting somebody's attention. What we want to do is get the court's attention. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Randolph. Thank you, Ami. Sadie, you want one closing remark because we are over time, but I love the spirit.
Can you give her my information? Can you give her my information, my phone number and all that?
We can. We really can. Okay. Sadie, anything from you?
Yeah, certainly look like we're lukewarm. And so certainly I invite you to come to Lafayette. We have a welcome platform here. So certainly you have an extended invitation to get this started right here in Lafayette, West Lafayette. Just give me the date, the time, I welcome you.
And you're putting up the filing fee, right?
I'm putting up the filing already. It's ready. And if you come through Lafayette before tomorrow, I'll meet you.
Okay, thank you all. Thank you so much for joining this this webinar and for presenting and sharing both views. I did have not a question in the Facebook Live, but just the comments that from a delegate who said that she did everything. She went to the hearings. She put out yard signs. She testified. And she thanks us. She thanks everybody for their advocacy. So, so people are working, and that came out of Fort Wayne. Okay, so without anything else, I thank you all, and we're going to close this one out because we have others coming on along. Thank you again. Bye-bye.
Thank you.